My name is Carl Pearson, and I'm the grandson of Mr. Herbert Horatio Dudley. And for those of you who don't know Mr. Dudley, he was born in January of 1892, and he passed away in June of 1965. He was originally from Cordell, Georgia, but moved to Dublin as a young child and made an impact, something that he wanted to do on the city of Dublin and Lawrence County and the surrounding Middle Georgia area.
Could you describe a little bit how, not only how Dudley, but his father's business empire in Dublin, and how he was able to establish successfully such a strong community support as well here in Dublin?
Certainly. Mr. Dudley had a strong orientation, which came from his parents, on education, on access to resources, and on bettering his community, as his mother was a teacher, and she was also an advocate for families and children long before we called them families and children. And his father was a businessman, and he always focused on the needs of the community. So if he found a need in the community or something that wasn't being addressed, his answer was always to start a business to address that need. So Herbert Dudley came along during the time when there was a segregated South, and access to jobs and education and things like that weren't equal for all the people in the community. And so he didn't really focus on black and white, but he did focus on haves and have-nots. So you'll see in a lot of the documentation on what he did, focused on serving people who didn't have access to things that they needed. The basic things: food, education, housing, access to money to buy things that they needed. So that was a lot of his activity, and he always used his educational basis and his access to people who were in positions of power to get what he needed, and then he would share that with people who needed it. And there was always an objective in the back of his mind to make everything more of a level playing field, or again, equal access to opportunities and to money, if that's what it took, in order to make that happen.
So what type of businesses did he operate here on Jackson Street?
Initially, the businesses were, the first business was a general store, a dry goods store, as they said back then. And a dry goods store was where you went to buy the things that were shelf stable, as we would put it now. Those were things that were in cans. Those were vegetables that would keep for a while. Later on, they added a meat market. But those were the initial two businesses that they provided in the downtown area as people started moving from the farm communities to some of the mill jobs in the downtown area, and to work in some of the industrial settings that were just starting in Dublin. Those people would then have to come and buy things on credit, so that they would then have meat and eggs and milk Monday through Friday until they got paid. So he would provide the credit, he would provide the dry goods and the meats and those things, so that people could sustain their families until they got paid.
So we're sitting in your office, which has a very beautiful vault in it. Could you tell us about that business that he operated, maybe when it started, and what its purpose was?
Certainly. There was Laborers and Mechanics Realty and Investment Company, which was in essence a bank. And in the 40s, Herbert Dudley realized that a lot of people didn't have the houses that they needed. They didn't have access to cars, transportation that they needed, because there was nowhere for most minorities to get a loan. And of course, they didn't have the resources or cash to buy these things. So it was one of his early intentions in the 40s to make there be equal, or at least some access to those things. So Herbert Dudley would borrow the money from the major banks based on his credit, and then reissue it to people that he thought were worthy of having access to building a house or buying a car. And hence, Laborers and Mechanics Realty and Investment Company started in the 1940s.
And at what, let me break a little bit, didn't at one time he hold almost $445,000? How much did he at one time hold in?
So as part of the documentation that we have, at one time there was as much as $440,000 in notes on due loans that he had given the community access to. And as a result, again, people were able to buy what they needed and to level the playing field in terms of access to capital required in order to buy cars, start businesses, and in some cases send their kids to school.
How do you think Mr. Dudley was able to establish all his businesses and operate them successfully in the face of all the laws and societal constraints in Dublin, Lawrence County, and the Southeast in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and the 60s?
One of the things about Herbert Dudley was that he was a scholar of law and business, which means that he ignored some of the long-standing societal rules that had been established around minorities or between the races. So because he knew what the law was, he was able to use those cases in order to get what he needed, what he wanted, and how he wanted to influence people. So in one of the early accounts, going back to 1916, he became the first county appointed official as a notary public. Now that was unheard of in those times, and he was not that old at age 24, but he became, again, the first black county appointed official. because he knew what the law was, and he knew that there was nothing in the law that said that he could not be a notary public. So he, as we say now, went for it. And it wasn't until after he was appointed that there was any conflict or outcry because he was black. Of course, that did happen, and it was the subject of a huge debate in society back at those times. But shortly after then, he took the position, but he initially declined to accept the position after he had been appointed, just because he did not want there to be conflict and anyone to have any grief or to have to fight over the issue. It was not that important to him. But later on, after it did go to court, people realized that he was completely within the law to have been appointed and to accept the role and to better the community, because then they would have access to a notary public.
Awesome.